Instead of focusing so much on being good at music, focus on making good music.
Sometimes in jazz education, we lose focus on the emotional component.
The first thing that you play doesn't matter. It's really the second thing that you play and how it relates to the first thing that you play.
If you're planning the next thing you're going to say, instead of listening to what the person's saying to you, that doesn't make for a very good conversation. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to play this lick. Instead of like, oh, the drummer went cha-cha, and then maybe I go.
Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here, and today we're going to do something very special, something I haven't done in a long time, and that is welcome onto the channel a fellow musician. I'm excited to share with you a conversation I had with one of my best friends, Grammy award-winning pianist Alex Brown. He's played with everyone from Paquito D'Rivera to Christian McBride to Yo-Yo Ma, and he is so exceptional, not only as a pianist, but a violinist and a composer and a producer. We go over everything from what is jazz to what makes a good solo to how to incorporate feeling and emotion into your playing so that it's not just notes, but how to make those notes into art. So before I ramble on too much, let's get right into the conversation. This is Alex Brown. Enjoy. Let's get into some deep questions here. What is jazz? We were both in the jazz department at New England Conservatory way back when, and you know, there's a lot of varying opinions on what jazz is. So how would you describe it? Or how would you define it?
I think there's a famous quote. I can't remember who it's attributed to. Maybe Herbie Hancock. It's something like, it's impossible to define, but you know it when you hear it. Something like that. I don't remember the exact wording of it. But that makes a lot of sense to me. I always love to combine different genres together. I don't think this has to be jazz. This has to be Latin American music, this has to be classical. To me, it's all just music. So I have a hard time sometimes even describing my own music or other people's music in terms of categorizing it. And I think Duke Ellington used to say basically that there's just good music and bad music. So I think a lot of great artists historically didn't even like the word jazz, but that's a whole nother discussion. But it's a tough question to answer because jazz usually has elements of improvisation. That's one way to define it. But there are other types of music that have improvisation. There's stylistic elements to it, of course, like bebop is a very specific type of jazz. It was basically invented by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and other people from that era. But before that, we had swing music, early jazz, like Louis Armstrong, people like that in New Orleans.
It sounds like the genre was more narrow when it was being developed, and over the years it's just gotten more and more broad to the point where maybe it's not even a genre anymore because it's just so hard to pin down, and there's lots of subgenres nowadays. But would you agree with that like you were saying back when there was in the swing era and bebop and even like hard bop, you know, it was a bit easier to say, okay, that's jazz or that's not jazz because it was just a newer genre of music?
I think so. And I think you can almost apply that trend just to music in general. Like look at Beyonce's country album. That album combines and is influenced by so many different styles of music. So I think it's kind of just a trend in general. The internet has been a big part of this. I think it's easier for people to connect. And even before the internet, it's just been getting easier and easier from people all over the world to connect with each other.
A related part of that is you don't have the same gatekeepers saying, okay, we're only going to put out this because it sounds like, you know, quote unquote jazz, and that's going to attract a certain audience. Like from a business perspective, having it be narrow and easily identifiable, it's like you're putting a label on it so that the consumer knows, okay, I like jazz, so I'm going to like this.
It's funny you say that too, because I guess often the gatekeepers, one of them anyway, were the record labels. It's literally called label.
Yeah, it's got label in the word. That's funny. So you put out several records now, right? How many is it?
As a leader, I've done 3. The third one was a co-led project with my good friend and steel panist extraordinaire, Victor Provost. It's funny to say that, but he's actually ridiculous.
Not steel pianist, like a steel pan.
Steel pan, as it's commonly known, steel drums. But you know, the real aficionados, they call it steel pan.
Okay, so you're authentic. Got it. So when you put out those records, were those with a label or did you do that completely on your own?
So my first record from I think 2009 or 2010, that was produced by one of my longtime musical mentors and employers, Paquito D'Rivera. So he put that out for me. That was kind of through Sunnyside, the record label, but it was his kind of arm of Sunnyside. But the last two albums I did, the Dark Fire Sessions, which I think came out 2021, that was self-released, as was this latest one, Island to Island.
Cool. So I think maybe we'll listen to some of that. Actually, why don't we do it right now? Let's jump into it. Let's listen to a little bit of Almost There from the Dark Fire Sessions. This is from 2021, and maybe we'll just jump into the beginning and listen to a little solo. And I'd love to, one of the things I wanted to get into here was your opinion on like what makes a good solo, or why you like a certain section of your solo. So, if you hear something and you're like, man, that was great. I know it might be hard to say that to your own playing, but I think that's always an interesting thing when you reflect on your own playing and you're like, you get that feeling like, oh, that's exactly what I wanted. Like there's nothing like that, to actually execute exactly what you had in mind, or even play something that you didn't have in mind but was sort of like a happy accident and you just loved it so much.
I'd love to say something about that before we listen to anything, is just real fast, which is, I think that's an interesting thing about jazz music, classical music, some other genres as well, but we're so focused on the technical aspects of the music and the theory and all that kind of stuff and getting really good at your instrument. And that stuff is important. But sometimes, not everyone, I don't think the greatest musicians have this issue, but sometimes in jazz education, we lose focus on the emotional component. And to me, a good solo, it's not about, am I showing off this fancy thing that I worked at, but is it adding to the music? If it's not adding to the music, what's the point? And I have to say that reminds, and by the way, I have so much respect for Jeff too. And I always think back about this time. We used to play a lot of, we would call them like jam session or session. When we were freshmen, we would just get together and play music together. And there was this time we were playing and it just wasn't happening what I was playing. We were just playing duo, just the two of us.
Saxophone and piano.
Sax and piano in one of the practice rooms at New England Conservatory. And I was obsessed with this girl at the time. I
remember this session. Yes, yeah, I remember it clearly.
And I'm not going to say her name, but just like, think about so-and-so. And all of a sudden I played and he's like, yeah, that was it. I don't know if it was actually any better or not, but I was instead of channeling like, oh, what triad pair should I play over this chord? I was thinking like, how do I feel right now? And that's what art is, in my opinion. That's what great art is.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I talk about a lot too in the videos that I make. I've mentioned it many times, but the phrase that I like to use to articulate this is, instead of focusing so much on being good at music, focus on making good music. But the question that, and I know we will get to listening to some music in a second here, but I guess a little bit of devil's advocate here, if you're not good at playing the music, like if you don't have the ability, are you then able to communicate that emotion? Like, don't you need to have a certain level of ability in order to get to that feeling part of things? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I'll come back to that in 1 second. I want to also mention, in terms of what you were saying right before that, I think it's a particular danger of living in this world of social media and the algorithm, because the algorithm tends to, people have a very short attention span now. So you can't create necessarily the greatest art and have it be something that people immediately connect with in 15 seconds. So we tend to, stuff that seems to do really well on social media is stuff that's like impressive technically often, or it's based on presentation. And I think that is maybe a challenge of our time. I know some of my favorite albums as a kid, or even now, it's stuff that I don't necessarily, it takes me a little while before I really appreciate it. Like sometimes I'll listen to it and I have to push myself a little bit to get into it. I can tell that it's amazing, but it's challenging. I think sometimes, take a really amazing symphony, for example, by Mahler or something. That might be a great work of art, but maybe if you just heard the first 10 seconds of it, you just be like, oh, swipe, It's something you have to put in some effort to, but then there's real payoff for if you learn to appreciate it. But to answer your most recent question, I think yes, of course you have to have a certain level. I mean, at the end of the day, if you create something cool, who cares? But
I guess it's the chances of creating something cool increase if you have the technical facility, for instance.
I use this analogy a lot. Like, take someone like Bob Dylan, like someone that like one of the greatest artists that more people have connected with than anyone else. And that's not because he's like the greatest singer of all time. That's not because he's the greatest guitarist of all time, but it's because of how powerful his music is and how much you're connecting with whatever it is that he's saying through his music. You could find some music student at a conservatory who could maybe sing way better on a technical level or play an instrument at a way higher level, but people aren't connecting with their music in the same way. So that's an analogy I like to make. And I don't mean that at all to take away from Bob Dylan, but I'm actually saying, just as someone who's not necessarily considered like the greatest technical master of his instrument, that doesn't matter, but he has a certain level of ability. And maybe something unique about jazz, and I guess classical music too, although that's more of like a performance, because you're not, unless you're a composer, you're not creating your own music. It's both. You have the virtuosity, but you're also have the emotion. And someone like John Coltrane's a good example of that. Like, he was an absolute master of the saxophone, but his music is just like pure, raw emotion.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, now that we all have the esteemed John Coltrane in mind, let's listen to Alex Brown play. This is Almost There from the Dark Fire Sessions. And we won't listen to the whole thing, but just a taste. Right. That's killing. When you listen back to that, I mean, this is like 4 years old now. Do you enjoy hearing this tune and hearing you play and your band play?
I do, and believe it or not, it's more than 4 years old. I think we recorded this 2015, 14.
Oh yeah, I remember when you were putting this album together. It was like the longest production timeline ever.
It was.
Okay, so this is, getting, close to 10 years old. So what is your, I'm just curious because, we were talking before about reactions and, what we think is, what we like in our own playing. Sometimes I know I can be my own worst critic, but would love to hear your take listening to this now.
I certainly am my own worst critic as well, except for those rare times where I'm just like, oh yeah, this is so good. I've tried to get better over the years as looking at something like this as more of an archive. This is just like a snapshot of a particular time, even a particular day. It's just one particular take. We probably recorded at least 3 versions of this, if not more. And this album was done in multiple sessions in multiple locations. And in fact, the reason it's called the Dark Fire Sessions, that was what we called our own recording studio. So this was mostly recorded at a studio that we made ourselves, put together in Harlem. But this particular track was recorded in my parents' basement, believe it or not. And my brother, who's playing bass, Zach Brown, amazing producer, engineer, who's currently in LA. But he recorded, played on, and mixed that record. I didn't know anything about that stuff at that time, so...
Well, it sounds great. I think that's a testament to how know-how and skill can trump less than ideal recording conditions. Like you don't have to be in a $1 million studio in order to make something that sounds professional. I mean, that's, I don't think anybody listening to that would think, oh, it sounds like, it was recorded in a basement. I mean, it's that's a testament not just to the recording and to Zach's ability to mix and produce and all the rest, but something that I think a lot about now that I've been making music. I graduated from NEC with the jazz performance degree, and then I got a master's in composition and arranging. And it wasn't until after all of that schooling that I actually started like producing music. I was getting into composing for film and advertising. And that's when I was exposed to this whole other side of things. Like you were saying, like when you were recording this, you didn't know as much about production and all the mixing know-how that goes into making a record. And at least for me, when I started making music for movies and advertising and all the rest, that was like a whole world of pain, really, because I would, be writing music that I know would sound good if real people were playing it. But, I was making the music on my own in Logic, using virtual instruments and mixing it myself and starting to learn about all this other stuff like compression and EQ and picking instruments based on their frequencies, not just on their ranges. So, there's a whole world of information that I hadn't learned yet.
I experienced the same thing. And I think it was actually after we had tracked most of this record, but before we finished producing and mixing it, I went back, did a similar program like you did. I did a composition program down at Frost, U of Miami, which was run by this guy, Gary Lindsay, who retired a couple of years ago. Amazing teacher. And his program, he made us, I had never used Pro Tools before. I was had basic Logic abilities. I would make my own sequences. And I think you're pointing, it's just, there's so many other aspects of music that we don't think about, especially as jazz musicians. We don't think about the production side. And he made all of his composition students record and mix. We had to record and mix our own projects. And not only does it teach you more about being a good composer, because you start hearing what issues come up when you record yourself. Oh, I can't hear the third trumpet. That's a balance issue with my writing. But then also things like you said, I never even thought about compression. I didn't even know what that was. And reverb, like all of a sudden I would go back and listen to old recordings that I used to listen to. And I heard them completely differently because suddenly I wasn't just listening to the music. And I think subconsciously, most of us, your average listener doesn't know any of the stuff that we just mentioned. They're not thinking about any of that, but you can still feel that. If something sounds really good, if there's the right amount of reverb versus it being drowned out, if there's too much compression, these are things that subconsciously we all notice, even if we can't put our finger on what it is exactly.
Right. But having a word for it and learning about it, like you said, you then hear it. It's kind of like, I mean, just to use a really common example, like you learn a new word in whatever language you speak, and then you suddenly see that word or hear that word much more frequently than you did before because it's on your radar. So the same is true for reverb or any other effects and compression. You can hear it more because you're aware of it. So that awareness is really deepens your appreciation of whatever it is you're listening to. But that also brings up, this issue with high art forms like jazz, where in some cases you do need to have, or at least it helps to have some knowledge about the music in order to enjoy it, let alone appreciate it. And that, everybody talks about how jazz has this dwindling audience. And, you were talking before about attention spans, but just in general, like the common criticism of jazz, I suppose, is this, that it's nonsense music, that if you don't really know about jazz and you haven't studied it in any capacity, you're just going to hear noise, basically. It's not as accessible as like a pop tune. So would you agree with that? I guess is the first question. Like, do you need to have some level of ability in playing the music? Like, you go to a jazz club and 90% of the people there are the music students at the local music school. Like, is that the case? I haven't been in a jazz club in a while, to be honest. But what do you think about that? Like, do you need to know how to play jazz to appreciate jazz? Let's start there.
I don't think so, actually. And in fact, there have been many times when I was playing with my own group or with someone else, and maybe in a venue that attracts tourists. So people that wouldn't necessarily go out of their way to hear jazz, but they're visiting New York or another city, and oh, that sounds like a fun thing to do, and it's like a nice experience. And people have come up to me so many times and said, I didn't think I liked jazz, but I loved that. And I think what people love is, first of all, I think people do have a preconceived notion of what it is. And like we were talking about earlier, it's such an expansive genre now. I mean, I don't even know if you can call it a genre anymore. And there's so many crossover artists that, is this jazz? Because there are vocals, but, there's improvisation the same way, So I think that's one way that people maybe get into it is they like for example, a singer that incorporates jazz into their music. Willow Smith is incorporating jazz in her latest project, and now she's playing at jazz festivals. I don't think a lot of people think of Willow Smith as a jazz artist, but I kind of I'm talking about two different things at the same time. But I think what I was saying a second ago, I think people appreciate the energy, and it's something that if you experience, of course, there's a lot of bad music in any genre. So if you go hear a bad jazz concert, I'm not going to like it either. But that's not because it's jazz music. That's because it's bad music. I think you could almost say that about any genre. And if you go see a really amazing concert where people are interacting with each other, because that's what one of the things that's unique about jazz. It's a kind of a cliche to say, but my favorite groups in that genre are groups where everyone is listening to each other and reacting, and it's not about one person. It's about the overall what's happening and the energy and connecting with everyone else's energy. And when you play with someone enough, you start to anticipate what they're going to say, what they're going to do, and then you react to it. And I think when that's really happening at the highest level, the crowd, even if they don't know what's happening at all, they feel that and they sense that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. That's also why it's so important to see live music, because you can get that visual cue of the drummer looking at the pianist, who's looking at the bass, and you can hear the interaction, but you can also see it, of course, when you're live, and that adds to it. And it also goes back to what you were saying earlier about how when you play with emotion, when you focus on making good music, and it's not just about chops, you can be a non-musician and appreciate that energy and feel that energy and enjoy it, even if you're not aware of, oh, this is in 7/4 or something like that. Like you can still enjoy the transmission of energy there and the energy going on within the band. So I think that's very true. But the thing that I forgot to say earlier that I was trying to get at was, yes, so much goes into the production process and the recording process, and there's a lot of know-how involved there, but the performance itself is hugely important. Like one of the I don't even know if I'd call it a tip, but one of like the maxims that I keep coming back to in teaching is, usually if there's an issue that you're trying to solve or some kind of problem in your playing or your music or whatever, it's like the issue is usually before. Let me use an example to describe what I'm saying here. So let's say you're making a record and you're like tweaking the reverb, or you're trying to get the compression right. Well, maybe you're trying to make it sound good after the fact, but really the issue was you didn't have the mic placed properly or the gain set properly. And then so you go back there and you're trying to fix that next time. And then like, oh, okay, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's actually like the way that it's being performed. Like you can record it with the best equipment and the best techniques, but if the performance itself is not good, it doesn't matter how expensive the equipment is, you're just going to capture a really bad performance. So I think this idea of always going back a step, it's like the old saying, we'll fix it in post for video production and photo and photography. Yeah, you can fix some things in post, but the best art, the best end result, usually happens because that initial part of the process is dialed in. And, you know, going back to the recording we were listening to, you know, the performances of everybody in that band is top notch, not just on an individual level, but in the way that you're playing together. So I don't know if there's a question there, but I think it's just a compliment that your ability, not just all the work that went into recording it, but the actual performance itself is so strong. That's one of the reasons why I think even if it were recorded on like an iPhone speaker or microphone or something like that, there would still be an element of, oh, this is cool. Like I would listen to this.
Well, thank you.
So with that,
I agree with everything you said. You can't, if something's poorly recorded or poorly performed, no amount of post-production will save it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's listen to a little bit of your solo in here. We'll skip over the bass solo just because nobody listens to that anyway. Sorry, Zach. I'm just kidding. That is Zach playing right there, right?
Yeah, in fact, you know what? Catch a little bit of the end of it, because the interesting thing about the solo, and it kind of goes to what I was talking about, I kind of tried to come out of what he was doing and almost like make it into just one thing. But you can just go towards the end is fine, just to get a little taste.
Okay, cool. I mean, that just speaks to the interaction that we were talking about before. Let me see if I can drop the needle here. So good. It's painful to stop it, but you know, like you said, people have short attention spans. Actually, if anybody wants to listen to this, of course, it's available on all the streaming services. This is Almost There from the Dark Fire sessions, and you know, I could listen to the whole thing. It's great playing, man. I don't know if I've ever listened to this, which is my fault and my loss. But tell me, because the question that I feel like so many people ask, and it's certainly a question that I would ask people when I was learning how to play, and that is, what are you thinking about when you play a solo like this? Are you thinking about anything?
I think
and don't give me the BS answer. Like if it's like, no, I'm just playing. Tell me what's up.
Well, if I have any criticism of my own playing here, it's that I was thinking too much, because I can hear times that, for me, I actually really do love this record, and I'm so proud of it still, and I love, and the things I don't like, I'm like, well, that's fine, that was 10 years ago, but I think the things I don't like are the times that, it's almost like, if anyone's into meditation here, it's almost like, you know, that feeling if you are able to let go, and it's like you tap into this energy that you didn't realize was there the whole time. And it's almost like this euphoric feeling or something like that. Excuse me. So I think that's the goal. Anytime I really feel good about my playing, it's that I was able to let go of everything. And it's almost like you're riding a wave, like surfing or something. It's like you're not actually thinking. It's you're letting it happen, and you're going with the flow. So the times that I didn't like my playing on that, again, I do really like it, but it's like, oh, I hear that I introduced this other idea that I clearly was thinking, oh, I should do this right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And instead of going with what was already just kind of happening naturally. Now, of course, I'm not saying you don't do the work. Like, that's kind of what practicing is. Like, we learn all these different things. Like, maybe we work on the bebop language, or really understanding how to play chord changes, or all the whatever details, the theoretical kinds of things. But the idea is you've internalized all of that enough so that when you really are playing, those are kind of tools that you don't actually have to consciously think about. And instead, usually what I'm thinking about, if I'm thinking about anything, is I'm really listening to what other musicians are doing. And it's kind of like a conversation. If you're planning the next thing you're going to say, instead of listening to what the person's saying to you, that doesn't make for a very good conversation. It's very similar musically. If I'm like, okay, now I'm going to play this lick, instead of like, oh, the drummer went cha-cha, and then maybe I go, you know? It's like this thing that just has to happen organically, if that makes sense. So
makes total sense, yeah.
If I'm thinking about anything, maybe it's about crafting a melody, and that's my personal preference. Or maybe I'm thinking about a rhythmic thing, because sometimes you do have to come up with something. So maybe I'll come up with some kind of idea and then try, and that's something hopefully I've gotten better at since then, is kind of taking one idea and letting it develop organically into something on its own. Let it bloom.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. Let it bloom. That's a great word. And I also agree completely that ideally you're reacting either to what other people are playing or to what you just played, and using that as inspiration for the next thing that you play, rather than continuously coming up with new ideas that are contrived. One of the things I tell my students is the first thing that you play doesn't matter. It's really the second thing that you play and how it relates to the first thing that you play. So yeah, you can have even if the first idea is a little contrived, like you're thinking, okay, I got to do something rhythmic here or do something more harmonically adventurous, whatever the case may be, that's fine. But what really matters is the thing you play after that. Like, does it relate, and how does it relate, and how does the following phrase relate to, there's this sort of chain link idea of one phrase to the next, and the relationship between phrases and between the musicians. So, but I guess as you were talking there, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say real fast, that reminds me of a quote, and it's not about jazz, but you could apply it to any music. It's a favorite quote of mine from one of my professors in grad school who taught film scoring, great film composer. He said, when you're under a tight deadline, you might as well develop your first bad idea instead of your second or third.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, you take any great musician can make anything sound good. Like even a quote unquote bad composition, you put it in the hands of a legend, and they're gonna get something out of it. They're gonna squeeze juice out of anything. You've been teaching for a long time, and like professionally, like in a sort of at an academic institution. You've been at Peabody University for at least 2 years now, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're working with your students, or even in your own practicing, you were talking before about this experience of finding that flow and sort of riding the wave. Is that something you can teach? Is it something that you can practice or learn? What do you think about that?
It's a very tough thing to teach, but I think a lot of things are, even with myself, more, what's the word, like esoteric concept like that. It's something that's hard to really describe to someone. You just have to kind of accept that it'll come over time. That's something you just have to, I like to discuss those kinds of bigger ideas with my students without expecting that they're going to get it instantly. And it's kind of like planting a seed. If that's at the back of your mind, then maybe in 5 years, without you realizing, it's kind of starting to happen on its own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that creeps up on you.
Yeah.
Well, what about like if you were to prescribe like, you know, 3 things for somebody to work on in order for that experience to creep up? Like I get that this is such a sort of an esoteric concept. It's a difficult thing to force. But if you were to set somebody up for success, what would you tell them? Like what can you do in a very specific, on a very specific level to encourage that experience to arise?
Right. So there's a few different ways to approach it. So one way, in kind of along the lines of what I was just saying, is get into almost like a meditative practice at the piano. So maybe think of a certain emotion, for example, that you want to channel, kind of like Jeff had me do all those years ago. And then sit down, or whatever your instrument is, sit down and just kind of improvise freely and try to conjure up that feeling. Don't be so focused on the notes that you're playing, but make that your goal. I'm going to get into this emotion and I want everything I'm playing to be connected to that. Now, in a more concrete way, one thing I like to do, especially with beginning jazz improvisers to work on that concept, is just take a 12-bar blues progression. So the 12-bar blues is really separated into 3 4-bar phrases. And traditionally, it was like an AAB form. So the vocals would actually repeat the first phrase, and then they would answer it with a different response. So a very practical and simple way to try this is just come up with a very simple idea and repeat it. And then when you get to the 3rd phrase, answer it. It's like you're asking a question, you're asking that question again, and then you answer it. And the answer has to have something to do with the question. You can't just be like, what did you eat for breakfast today? What did you eat for breakfast today? I prefer flying Delta. Makes no sense. I'm not, by the way, this is no endorsement of a specific airline.
You teased us before with a little piano. Can you give us an example of what this might sound like? Maybe do it the quote unquote wrong way first, and then show us what it might sound like in the way that you're prescribing.
Yeah, and I don't want to say wrong because, you know, there's different ways to play, but if your goal is to do a specific thing and you don't do it, I guess that's wrong.
Yeah, and so, I think it's also helpful as like a student, somebody who's practicing, to have like at least in the practice room, like sort of a clear assessment of, okay, am I doing this right or I'm doing this wrong? Even if, you know, in the real world or when making art, there's no rules like that.
Right. So I'm going to use a minor blues in C minor. Can you hear the piano?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. So a lot of people, I mean, we could get into a whole nother discussion too of like what notes to use, what scales to use. A lot of beginners start off with the blues scale or the pentatonic scale, right? And I know Jeff has a lot of great content about these kinds of things already. But let's say we're going to use C minor pentatonic, maybe with that flat 5, which makes it the blues scale, just to simplify things, right? So the idea is, instead of just playing whatever you want, I mean, I don't think that was bad, but that's not what we're trying to do right now. So that what we're trying to do is, I need to come up with just a simple melody that's going to work for the first 4 bars, and then I can repeat it for the second 4 bars. So it could be something this simple. Now I'm going to answer that. So maybe I use a similar rhythm, but I change the notes a little bit, right? So I didn't do anything crazy. I didn't go to some completely new idea. I was kind of responding to what I already did. So if I wanted to, you know, once you're comfortable with that kind of thing, I could start maybe adding a little fill in between. something simple. Maybe change this one. Maybe this time I do a little bit more. Now I'm starting to kind of go somewhere else with it, but it's kind of a gradual thing that's happening. I'm not just playing random ideas.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that people, especially beginning jazz musicians and improvisers, they hear the pros and the legends play all this stuff, and it sounds great, and it sounds kind of wild and crazy. There's a lot of notes sometimes, and there's a lot of information. And I think what a lot of folks forget is that, or maybe they just don't even realize, is that all of those legends can do that simple version that you played that first time through, with the simple melody, leaving space, repeating it, leaving space, and then, you know, that in that last 4 bars, playing something that's sort of like a commentary on what you played before. Like underneath all of the fancy stuff, there are those fundamentals and that foundation. And so even if, you know, one of the examples that I like to use is the tune Confirmation, like Charlie Parker tune, which if you dissect it, if you just listen to it, maybe we should play it. Well, it's probably going to get me doing some kind of copy. Yeah.
It's been a while.
Right. Well, there's a lot of notes, right? It's a bebop tune. There's a lot of notes, but underneath all those notes, there's this thread, like even just on a rhythmic level, right? There's a relationship from one phrase to the next embedded within those more chaotic lines, and it's not chaotic. It's just there's a lot of notes there, but there's still there's something underneath the notes. There's some kind of like connective tissue that relates one phrase to the next. And before you can do that version, like before you can be Charlie Parker, you have to be the one who can create something that is the simplest version, that does just start with one simple phrase, you leave some space, you repeat it, you leave some space, and then you play the commentary on what you just played. If you skip that step, then you're kind of, you know, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're kind of fooling yourself into thinking that you can play, because if all those guys who can do like the crazy, cool, fancy stuff that we love to listen to, they can also do the simple version.
It's kind of like, I like the building analogy. You can't build the Chrysler building with all that beautiful Art Deco stuff if you don't have a solid foundation. Yeah. If you only start with that, the whole thing would, you know, it wouldn't stand. And it's really about, that's what this is all about, foundation, structure. The blues is a form. Most of my favorite musicians in the jazz world and other worlds would say that's the most important thing, is the blues, and you have to know how to play the blues. And I think almost all American music actually comes from the blues. I mean, you can trace it all back to African American spirituals and gospel, early gospel, whether it's jazz, whether it's country music, of course R&B, everything, it comes out of that.
And in case people don't know, R&B stands for rhythm and blues. You know, I'm sure there's somebody out there who didn't put that together. You reminded me of when we used to live in Boston together. We had this big house with a bunch of roommates, and in the basement we had a drum set and a keyboard, and we'd go down there and play a bunch of sessions, you know, almost daily basis. But there was one period, and maybe you remember this, where I was like obsessed with playing gospel chops on the drums, and like these like really wild fills. And I'd be like working on these fills, and I'd be trying to practice it, and this is on the drums, and I'm not a drummer, but I'd be working on it in what I thought was like a smart, methodical way, you know, slow it down, you know, sort of speed it up. But I was working on these fancy fills before I could even hold down like a steady beat, let alone one that like felt good. And it's just like you were saying, it's trying to get into the decoration on that Chrysler building and all the shiny bells and whistles before you're able to just set up the basic scaffolding. So you can't skip that step. And and a lot of people do that, and just about every art form, and just about every you know, I've been working on drawing lately. I mentioned that to you last time we were hanging out, and you know, it's really easy to look at the best of the best, and they do their thing, and they seem to do it effortlessly, and if you look at the and if you try to do it like them and skip the foundation, it's like I said before, it's just going to fall apart, and you're fooling yourself into thinking that you can do something, and you probably will just get frustrated because you'll be like, why isn't this working? Well, it's because you don't have the foundation in place. So
to your point, you know, about playing the beat first, well, I mean, that's something that's always been really important to me, and I also love to play drums and probably shouldn't be, but groove, you know, it's all about groove, and that's not just about on drums or percussion. That's about on whatever instrument you play. You can't depend on the rhythm section to groove for you. You got to groove yourself. You should just be practicing. Does this feel good? That's so much. In fact, that's in a lot of ways more important than the notes. And my favorite musicians in any genre of music, they could sing, they can play one note, they can sing one word, but just the feel that it has is so strong. And it's true in other art forms too. It reminds me of a time I went and saw Dave Chappelle live, who I think is hilarious. And this is when he hadn't been performing live for a really long time post Chappelle show. So I was kind of shocked to see he was performing. I happened to be in Montreal, and I said, oh, Chappelle's performing tonight. I didn't even know he was touring again. So, and there was a really great comedian who opened for him, who was great, and he's funny and blah, 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 and he's pretty famous also. I'm not going to say who it was, but it was just like the difference when Chappelle, just when he walked on stage, like he didn't even say anything, but it was like, I don't know how to even explain it. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about just tapping into that energy. He was just on some different energetic wavelength, and you could feel it.
Yeah, yeah, and that translates directly to music. You can have the same lick or line and give it to two different musicians, and it could sound vastly different. And it just goes back to what you were saying about how it doesn't matter so much what the notes are. If you play it well, you play it well, and if you play it with a good feel, and I think, to be clear, we're not specifically talking about. We're not talking about feeling in the same way we were talking about it before. Like, not, I mean, the emotional component is related, but I think what we're getting at here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of the feel as it relates to like the phrasing and the time feel and the rhythm. So a little bit more of a musically specific connotation here. Is that what you were getting at as well?
100%. And to put that in a way maybe any music producers out there might understand, it's like if you're making a beat in your DAW, if you quantize it like completely on the grid, it might not groove as hard as if you had it just a little bit off, or the bass is a little bit behind, like these kinds of things. That's essentially what we're doing with, you know, live as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Now, can that be practiced? Can you practice feel? I mean, obviously you can practice your, you know, various rhythms, and you can practice different kinds of rhythmic independence. You know, I've been working on a lot of this lately, like singing certain things and then clapping different subdivisions and those kinds of challenges. But is that the recipes for success there? Like those kinds of like rhythmic puzzles to work out within your different limbs? Or are there other exercises or ways of practicing that translate directly to a better feel?
Yeah, I think those kinds of rhythmic independence exercises are certainly part of it, because you want to be able to have, if you can't really internalize time and rhythm well, then it's going to be hard to get to something as nuanced as figuring out a specific feel that you want. But I think that's a big part of it for sure. I think the other part of it comes from, you can take this as far as you want. It could just be from listening a lot, so much that you internalize the way something feels. So, for example, I love samba music from Brazil, which Jeff knows very well, because we used to walk around Boston together, and I'd be going, and he'd be like, dude, you can't do that.
I still do it
in
though.
public. But um, that's a particular feel. Just like playing straight ahead jazz is a particular feel. Like gospel is a particular feel. I mean, there's lots of different versions of that within each of these. Everyone has their own version of it. Funk, right? There's Tower of Power. There's Earth, Wind, and Fire. There's James Brown. There's all these different people. They all have their own feel within that genre of music. So something that's like typically told to jazz musicians is transcribe, right? So a lot of what that means is you learn someone else's solo, essentially. You figure out what notes they're playing. And a lot of people do just that. They just figure out the notes. But if you're only figuring out the notes, you're missing probably 75% of it at least, because what you really want to do, there's different ways that you could do this, but if you're a sax player, you could find a sax player that you really like their feel, their rhythmic feel, and then you learn some of their solos, and you have to be really hard on yourself in terms of making sure that, am I just playing the notes or am I really imitating the way that that person played? And so, like I said, you can do it more in a general way where you're just listening a lot and you kind of will internalize it over time somewhat. And then you can take more of a, you know, really get in the weeds and actually learn a specific solo. And also if it's a specific style of music, like I mentioned, Brazilian samba, you could just play along to recordings of that kind of music and really try to lock into what the drums are doing and what everyone is doing, and make sure that your rhythmic feel is aligned with what's happening. Of course, for any kind of music that has like specific rhythms, it helps to understand what's going on too. So if you really want to play Brazilian music well, for example, or Cuban music or whatever it is, Balkan music, you got to learn the different parts and what they're doing. But then it's a kind of a combination of all these things, some learning, some internalizing, if that makes sense.
Totally, totally. And that's a huge part of transcribing, because if you're just focusing on the notes, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss like what really makes it sound good. Like if you love the way a solo sounds, sure, some of it has to do with the notes and the way those notes relate to the harmony and the changes and all the rest. But it's also the way that that musician is playing those notes. So one of the ways that I like to practice and recommend that people practice is don't just transcribe it, like sing it and play it. Like singing it is a great way, because then you don't have to worry so much about the technical challenges that a certain line might present. And it also gives you a more direct access to, or I should say, a representation of how you're truly hearing it. I like to tell people that your singing voice is sort of the window to your ear. Like how you sing is how you're hearing something. That doesn't mean you necessarily need to sing with the best tone quality or the best intonation, but you know, if you're singing with a good feel, chances are you're going to be playing with a good feel. And if you're not singing with a good feel, it's not like you're magically going to go to your instrument and suddenly sound a heck of a lot better just because you're playing an instrument. How you sing is how you play. That's the mantra I like to keep fresh in people's minds. And so recording yourself and listening back and kind of comparing how you sound to the record, that can be really helpful. And singing, of course. And then, just being aware of how you're transcribing. If you're going one note at a time, you have like some app and you press start and then you press stop and you go one note, you're missing the feel. So yes, I think it can at times, maybe you slow it down if you need to figure out something that's kind of hard, or, there's one note that's like confusing you, you start and you stop until you can figure out what that note is. But if you're not hearing the entirety of the phrase, you're going to miss that feel. So all of those little tips I think are helpful for people to keep in mind. Is there anything else that comes to mind for you when it comes to transcribing and how to make that process as valuable as possible? Because it does take time and it can be pretty challenging to do so.
Yeah, I would say start with something simple. That could be your favorite musician, just the way they played a melody. If you like their feel, just check out something simple, maybe a tune that you already know, but hear how they play the melody, because it's going to be unique. And also, you don't have to transcribe an entire long solo. If there's a phrase that you like, just learn that one phrase as a starting off point, because sometimes it's good to just take this and then take that. And that's kind of what makes us each our own individual musician and helps us find our own artistry. I don't necessarily, personally, I'm not trying to sound exactly like someone else with my own playing. That's a part of the process of finding your own voice, is finding out what do I like, and I'm incorporating all these different influences, and then that becomes me, and I have my own thing also, and that's all kind of in there. But yeah, so taking just one chunk of a solo or one phrase is a really good way to start, and you can practice that. Something that helps you internalize that idea is, I like to tell people to practice it in 12 keys, but instead of doing it chromatically, let's just take the lick, say that you like the lick. Instead of going, other instruments it's different, but especially on piano, it's too easy to just do it chromatically because you literally are just moving your fingers by a half step. So instead of doing that, I do it in the circle of fifths. I'm starting in C major, resolving to C major, then I do it a 2-5 to F major, then to B flat, E flat, whatever it is. I was just kind of using that pattern just as a demonstration. But whatever it is that you're practicing, the other day I was practicing a Bach chorale, and I found this really cool thing, and I thought, I want to incorporate that into my jazz playing. So I just it was 2 beats long. And in fact, it was too tricky for me at first to transcribe the entire thing, even though it was only 2 beats with some inner voice movement and stuff, some eighth notes or something. So I just started off just with the last beat in all 12 keys. And then once I could do that, then I could add in the other thing. So it's kind of also, if something feels overwhelming, I always tell my students, if they're having trouble with this whole thing, let's just break it down into smaller chunks that you can do.
Totally. That's such an important point, especially with something as challenging as transcribing. But with anything, you have to remember that you can break it down into those baby steps. And it's so easy to forget. I don't know why. Maybe because it's just not as obvious. Like the comparison that comes to mind is like, if you go to the gym and you can't lift the 50-pound dumbbell, it's kind of obvious that you pick up the 40-pound or the 30-pound. You just keep going down until you can pick it up. But with music, it's maybe because it's not as visual, it's not as obvious as to how you can simplify something. But the thing that I tell people is, if something's too challenging or overwhelming, you can give yourself more time to think and or less to think about. And more time to think is like slowing down the tempo. That's like a really clear metric. Like if you can't play it at 90 beats per minute, you go to 80 or you go to 70. Like having that number can be helpful. And then, like you were saying, you're giving yourself less to think about. Instead of trying to do an entire measure, you do just 2 beats or even just 1 beat. Like this rhythmic thing I've been working on. I've been trying to. This is an exercise that I was working on, inspired by. You remember Will Vinson, my old saxophone teacher? So he just came out with this book, and I'm hoping to have a conversation with him as well in the near future.
Nice.
He just came out with this really cool book on time, and one of the exercises he recommends is like clapping that sort of that Afro-Cuban rhythm. That's where it's like that. So tapping that while singing ahead. And, you can start with something simple, like he recommends Bye Bye Blackbird, just a lot of quarter notes, fairly basic rhythmic melody. But then once you can do that, try a Charlie Parker head. So I've been working on doing that rhythm while singing Billy's Bounce, the Charlie Parker head. And it's challenging. At least for me, it's pretty challenging. So I've been trying to work it out by just starting with, if I can't do the first 4 measures, I'm just going to go for the first 2 measures. And if I can't do that, I'm just going to do that 1 measure. And if I can't do that, I'm just going to do half of that measure. And you kind of drill down into those little kinks, untie those knots so that you can then assemble it back together and get through the whole thing. But it's so easy to get frustrated and overwhelmed with this kind of music, because it can be really hard. And if you don't take it upon yourself to think, okay, what do I have to do to make this easier? You're just going to get so frustrated and give up, because it is a challenging music to play. Like, whether we put a label on it or not, jazz is hard. There's a reason why, the legend goes that Charlie Parker practiced like 15 hours a day for 3 years before he sounded like he did. It does take work. Except this is a tangent. When you were in school, Alex, it seemed like you could already play anything you wanted to play. Now, whether that was true or not, that was the feeling that I certainly had. So tell me what you think about that. Like I said, this is a left turn, but tell me what you think about the idea of talent versus skill or craft. Like, is there such thing as talent? How important is it? Because I think you can connect with this both on a personal level and as somebody who's worked with many students over the years. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea of talent versus skill.
Yeah, well, by the way, thank you. I certainly didn't feel that way. But I think as human beings, we all have different strengths and weaknesses. That's just what makes us different. If everyone had the exact same talent in all the same areas, we wouldn't be different. And
well, let's define a few terms. How would you define the word talent?
Instead of talent, I just mean we have strengths. Like, I know that I could never have been a basketball player. That has to do with physical limitations. That has to do with me never being a great athlete. And I just have to accept that. Now, I certainly could probably, if I practiced basketball every day and broke it down, I could get way better and probably have a great time doing it, and maybe even get to be pretty good, but not on a professional level. This maybe wasn't the best example because I think
it is. I think it is actually, and the one that comes to mind for me is basketball as well. Like with basketball, it's obvious if somebody's tall. Like that is a quote unquote talent, innate gift, whatever you want to call it. That
advantage.
It's advantage. It's an obvious one. And some of the ones that are related to music are just less obvious because you can't necessarily see them. But please go on with what you were saying.
I mean, you could also be like really tall and clumsy and be a horrible basketball player.
Sure.
So nothing is a given. Now, I think some people hear about improvisation and they just think, oh, I just can't do that. I even know a lot of amazing classical musicians who it's just like so foreign to them because they were just taught in a way where you're just reading. And that's how you play music. You read something that someone writes down on a page. And it's funny because last year I was at a college in Tennessee doing a master class outside of Nashville. And I did this demonstration where I took the tune, All the Things You Are, a jazz standard, and I said, each chord is a seventh chord, right? And I did a demonstration where I played a solo over it, only using the 4 notes. So I was basically just arpeggiating the chords. And it's funny because the director of the program, after the masterclass was over, he came up to me, he said, I love that demonstration. It reminds me a lot of this video by this guy named Jeff Schneider. Do you know him or have you seen his videos? And then I think I actually got you on the phone because he was so excited.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
But it's funny because we're both thinking the same thing, I guess. Or maybe I saw that video of yours and forgot and stole it without realizing. But I think that's a really good example of you can learn how to improvise. Just because you don't have as much natural inclination, maybe, it's a skill. And there are plenty of talented people. I mean, we know so many people over the years, I'm sure, people we went to school with, people from high school, whatever, incredibly talented musicians who talent isn't everything, who just didn't end up becoming musicians or successful musicians, because you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't do the work, someone who maybe doesn't have as much natural talent but works harder than you, eventually it's like maybe you start off with this advantage, but it's just going to be that.
Yeah. That brings to mind the Charlie Banakis, somebody that we both studied with, and he would always tell me, because we would work on ear training together, and I asked him one day, this is great, but it's annoying because if you have perfect pitch, you can do these exercises right away. You don't have to work at it. And he's like, yeah, that may be true, but once you're able to do the exercise, it doesn't really matter. Maybe it takes you a little bit longer to get there, but once you work on these exercises, you basically have the same ability. So even if you don't get it right away, that's not to say that you can never get it. It just means, yeah, that particular skill set might require a little bit more time and effort, but you can still get there. So I guess it's just, I think something that people can use as I've certainly used it as an excuse when I've gotten frustrated. It's like, oh, I just don't have the talent, or, oh, this would be so much easier if I had, perfect pitch or whatever. You have perfect pitch, by the way.
By the way, Jeff, you ready?
I plead the fifth. So
I do have perfect pitch, and I think I'm starting to lose it actually a little bit, because lately I've been about a quarter step off sometimes, or a half step off. But there's certainly advantages, and there's also disadvantages. And by the way, I never got that far on that exercise either. I still would have to train my ears, because maybe I can hear an individual note. I can tell you that's a B flat or something. But if someone goes like this, that still takes like real skill to be able to hear all of those separate.
That's a great point. Yeah. Even if you can identify them, like sorting out the clutter and focusing in on one note at a time to identify it is, that's challenging regardless. By the way, that exercise that we're talking about, I've made a couple of videos about it in the past, but it's this famous Charlie Banacus exercise where, like Alex just played, you play like a simple cadence and then a cluster of notes, or if you're just starting out, one note at a time, and then the person who's training would identify what that note is. And then once you're able to do one note, then you can do two notes at a time. And as you get to more notes played simultaneously, it's not just the challenge of figuring out what the notes are, but like I was saying, sorting out the musical clutter that comes up as you have all of these notes happening at the same time. So, but it's a great exercise, and it's really one of those things that gets you hearing inside music. And it actually reminds me of transcribing, because transcribing is one of those, I guess we can call it an exercise, but one of those things that you do that requires you to go deep into a single recording or a single phrase. And by going deep and listening almost like you're getting inside the music, you absorb it on such a deeper level. So I think that's a thing that is really important to learning how to play this kind of music, is being patient enough that you can go deep. It kind of gets back to that short attention span. Like the short attention span is not conducive to getting good at music or anything for that matter. But that's kind of an obvious thing to say.
We're all guilty of that. I'm trying to learn some other instruments just for fun, and I get very frustrated that I can't shred on the mandolin after playing it for probably a total of 3 hours in the past year since I've gotten it.
Well, I'm sure you're pretty good, because I've heard you play drums. I've heard you play violin. I think you can call yourself a violinist. Would you say that?
At one point, maybe.
Okay, at one point. And you've certainly played enough drums. We've played gigs where you've played drums before, and you do just fine. It sounds great. But I guess that let me ask you first: are you on a time crunch at all?
I can keep going a little while.
Regarding playing more than one instrument, is there a value, and is there a disadvantage to doing that? Because I know that I like to dabble in some bass. I like to dabble on the keys. I don't play as much saxophone as I used to, but it's fun to kind of switch it up and dig into other instruments. But at the same time, if you spread yourself too thin, you become, jack of all trades, master of none. So what is your opinion on this? What do you tell your students? What do you tell yourself?
So I think a lot of the most amazing multi-instrumentalists that I've seen started young. So I think if you're playing a lot of different instruments as a kid, it's just a time that we absorb more information. It's like if you learn multiple languages as a kid, it's easier. I've seen like a lot of people that got started as church musicians who can like play a lot of different instruments. For me, it was just something I wanted to do. And also being a pianist, it wasn't the most social instrument. So I didn't really get to play in ensemble. So I wanted to play an orchestra at my school. That's why I played violin. I always wanted to play drums. So that took some years to persuade our parents to allow a drum set in the house. But And that was a great social experiment, not experiment. Well, I guess you could say that too. Social experience, playing in band, in high school and all that kind of stuff, and doing marching band. I think for
Like
me,
drums and marching band?
I did played snare. Yeah.
I had no idea. That's cool.
Um, I think for me, it's been very valuable because I do a lot of composing, arranging, and orchestrating for people,
Mhm.
and especially strings. If you're writing for orchestra, you have to have, of course, strings is such an important component of the orchestra. Of course, brass, woodwinds, percussion as well. So I kind of got strings and percussion pretty covered because I played both. So I understand how the violin works. And I wish I played some woodwind instruments or some brass, because when I'm writing for brass or woodwinds, I just have to go off of like what I've read about them in orchestration books and what I've heard from listening to those instruments play. And I work with a lot of people who play those instruments. So you get a sense of what they can do and what they can't do. But I can't personally tell you what it feels like to play those instruments. I don't really know, like, oh, like going from this note to that note feels weird because of this fingering. I have no idea. Someone has to tell me that. With string instruments, uh, violin, I understand how the different strings work. So I know how to write uh, like double stops. I know how to like use three notes at a time on the violin from playing three different strings and that kind of thing. And that translates very easily to viola and even cello or bass. Um, so it's really valuable if you want to be an arranger or an educator, because if you're working with different students who play different instruments. But sure, at the same time, it does take you away from. I think it's a very personal thing. If you want to just be the best pianist ever, and that's all you care about doing, I'd probably be a way better pianist if I didn't spend so much time trying to do different things. I
Right.
personally, I love playing multiple instruments. I love writing. I love, getting into the production stuff now and arranging and orchestrating. So I don't think I would be happy only being a pianist. I consider it kind of like one of many things I do. And I also do think there's a lot of value for everyone to learn drums or some percussion, because that really does help your time and your feel, all that kind of stuff we were talking about earlier. When we were students at NEC, New England Conservatory, I I met this guy Oscar Stagnaro, who taught the Latin jazz ensemble at NEC when we were students there. And Oscar became, I really have to give him credit for basically launching my whole career, because he's the one who introduced me to Paquito D'Rivera. And he was like one of my greatest mentors. And the first thing he told me when I was trying to learn some of these styles of music from South America, he said, I was trying to learn how to play Brazilian music. He said, get a pandero if you want to get the feel. That's going to teach you how to get the feel. If you want to play Afro-Cuban music, learn to play congas, just some basics, because that's what's going to give you the rhythmic element. So you don't have to necessarily become a master conguero to the point that you're out there playing gigs with a salsa band or something, but some knowledge and some experience with other instruments can definitely be very valuable in whatever your main instrument is, if that makes sense. Very
Makes total
long-winded
sense.
answer.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that comes to mind though is it seems like some people can pick up any instrument and sound good. Like Jacob Collier comes to mind, right? He's like sort of the textbook example in this day and age of somebody who plays a whole bunch of different instruments. And it seems like if you just heard him play that instrument isolated, you would think that's his first instrument. Um, so what is it about that? Like, why is it that some people can't? I have my own theories, but why do you think that some people can pick up? And we have some friends that are able to do this as well, and I would count you as one of them. They can pick up just about any instrument, and even if they're not playing it properly, even if they're not playing it um, in a way that is correct, which is exactly what I just said. Why is it that they still manage to sound good?
That might go to the basketball analogy a little bit. Some people just have a propensity for, they're just like a real, they're just natural in that way. They can just, that's kind of an innate I think there's some level of innate talent to that. I think there's also some level of, I don't know Jacob Collier's history. If I had to guess, I'm guessing he probably was playing a lot of different instruments from a young age, even if he wasn't necessarily serious about all of them in the same way. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about like church musician. If you're 4 or 5 years old and you play guitar and then you're playing some bass and you're playing drums and then piano and all these different things and you're singing, it's a lot easier if you've been doing that for a long time since you were very young than like at the age of 40 being like, okay, I'm going to be a prodigy multi-instrumentalist. Like, it's probably not going to happen. I hate to tell you.
Yeah. Oh, I think that the multilingual analogy is great, because even if you speak several languages and then you go out to learn, you say you want to learn a new language that you don't know yet, it's a lot easier to learn that language you've never spoken before, even because you've got 2 or 3 under your belt already. Each new language that you learn is easier to learn, even if all of those words are foreign to you. So I think that's a really great analogy that I haven't thought of before. What I was thinking was, there are these musical skills that are sort of instrument agnostic, like having good ears, having good time, having good rhythm, having good coordination. Like all of these, I think these are the skills that sort of add up to talent. And I also think that they can be worked on. Like if you have great time and great feel, you can hit the side of a table and make it sound good. It doesn't need to be even an instrument. Like you can make anything sound good if you have the underlying foundations, going back to what we were talking about before with those fundamentals and having the strong foundation. That those parts of playing music transcend the instrument.
Yeah, I could give a few personal examples myself. Like when I started playing percussion in middle school, I guess, I was already basically going to band, but then I was going to a practice room and just practicing. I was supposed to be practicing piano. I think I was actually trying to make my own games on my TI-83 Plus calculator. But shout out to millennials who know what that is. But pretty quickly they realized like, oh, I could transfer, my piano skills. I was pretty much with no percussion experience whatsoever. I was already better at playing the vibes and the xylophone than all the people that had been playing percussion already, even though I couldn't play a snare drum roll to save my life. So the first thing I was doing was playing the mallet percussion parts that no one else could play. I already understood the keyboard setup and I could read music really well. So it was like those other skills started to catch up. I think I practiced a snare drum roll for 6 months and I never thought I'd be able to get it. And then all of a sudden it just clicked. I'm not saying I had the best snare drum roll, but it was something good enough to play in a middle school band. And I think I didn't even get into the better band at my high school. I think I had been playing for 1 year and I got into the lower band at my high school. It wasn't a performing arts high school or anything like that. And then somehow that same year I got into all-state band on percussion. And it was because I was transferring. I went to the audition and I could sight read everything, even though I was still getting my percussion playing up to par. Those are skills that transfers. And kind of like now I'm trying to learn the mandolin in my spare time. And coming from, since I play the violin, I already have the left hand kind of down, although it's a fretted instrument. So that's different for me. I'm not used to frets on the violin. And the biggest challenge for me is picking. It's very hard for me to pick. And I really want to learn guitar too. And I thought, well, the guitar is a completely different system of notes and it's 6 strings. So if I start with the mandolin, which I've been really into like bluegrass and folk stuff too, so it's fun. I thought if I get the picking down, I don't really have to worry about the left hand. I already know the notes. So I already have all the musical skills. The only thing that's keeping me from being a good violinist right now, mandolinist, violinist too, are the technical limitations of the instrument. But if I were going to play trumpet or something like that, I mean, it would be the same thing, but it's a much harder thing to transfer to. If you play an instrument that's completely unrelated, it's learning a completely new technique. And that does go back to what Jeff was saying earlier. I think someone may have never, in fact, I was just teaching at NYO last week, which is the National Youth Orchestra. They take the best students from around the country. It's through Carnegie Hall. I was teaching at the jazz program. The lead trumpet player is like not even a junior in high school, and he was insane. He was hitting these like ridiculous high notes on the trumpet, like playing his butt off. And I was talking to him, oh, how long have you been playing trumpet? I think he's been playing trumpet for like 2 years. He's just like, it's just a, it's just a freak. He just like was one of these people that just somehow that's his thing. He picked up a trumpet. He's been playing for 2 or 3 years, and he's already one of the best in the country. I mean, he's playing higher than a lot of professional lead
Did he
trumpet
play any
players.
other instruments prior to trumpet?
I'm not sure actually. That's a really good question. I should have asked him.
Yeah, because that's always that's the thing that I always think about is like, what are the underlying skills and what is that foundation that allows somebody to pick something up so quickly? Yeah, there's of course the specific technical aspects of an instrument, like a snare drum roll or getting the embouchure right on a wind instrument, or picking on the guitar. But all of those seem kind of secondary to me compared to having good ears, good time, good feel. Like you can put those foundational skills on any instrument, and you need to put them on any instrument. So I guess my point is like kind of going back to what we were saying before. If you don't have those foundational skills in place, if you're not working on the stuff that really has nothing to do with the instrument specifically, you can have all the technical chops in the world. It doesn't really translate to anything good if the other stuff isn't there. I think that's sort of like the moral of the story that I keep coming back to.
It's very true. And I'll add one thing that's not that point that you're making, but it also goes to the talent versus hard work thing. Like you can be the greatest musician ever, but if you don't put in the time to actually practice, then you have to put in time and consistency often to get the technical side down too.
So with that, do you still practice? Be honest.
I have periods. Well, I'll say this. I'm always working on making myself a better musician. So I'm not always practicing piano as much as I should. I'm often practicing if I have to learn music for a gig or a performance. I'm like, oh, I have to practice this. Like, especially if it's a hard classical thing. But even if it's just learning tunes, getting familiar with someone's music, you can't show up to performance not having practiced. Am I very consistent about having like a daily practice routine every day? No, that's something I'm not good at, and I need to get
Is that
better at.
something you used to do? Is that something you used to do?
Yeah, when I was in high school, I was kind of forced, you could say, to do that. I mean, my parents, who were very supportive, they weren't going to pay for music lessons if I wasn't going to practice. So they made sure I practiced. And I'm glad that they did, because that's why I think I was able to get to the level I was at in college, because I had a consistency early on. And I will say I'm always working on something to better myself as a musician. So right now I'm trying to get better at mixing. I'm mixing my own project, and I'm spending a lot of time really getting deep into that. I'm getting into a lot of writing for film and more of that kind of stuff. So I'm like, how can I make like you were talking about earlier, the production is such an important point, using the plugins. How can I make these plugins sound as realistic as possible, make it sound like a real orchestra? So, or just like studying orchestration, working on composition. I mean, it's kind of like what you said a few minutes ago. If you stretch yourself too thin, can you do anything really well? But you do have to also pick and choose what you want to focus on. So right now I'm kind of focusing on a lot of that stuff. But I mean, I was just practicing Chopin etudes the other day to get my technique feeling good. And, it's kind of like there's always something to work on. It never ends. And that's actually a beautiful thing and an overwhelming thing. But it's a beautiful thing because, like, no one's ever going to just master music and run out of things to do. It's literally endless. You can spend your whole life trying to get better at it, and you still have barely scratched the surface of it.
Yeah, I think that can be a real challenge, because as you do get better, the gains, and this is with anything else, the first thing that comes to mind with the word gains is like going to the gym and building muscle. And, obviously when you're starting out, anybody who's gone to the gym, you start to see those results pretty quickly. And then as you get to like the top level bodybuilders, like you get that diminishing returns effect where the progression is so small for the amount of work that needs to be put in. And the same is true for music. Like, I think that's why a lot of people plateau and give up there, because you get to a certain level, and then in order to break through to that next level, it requires a lot of work, and the gains are just not as obvious. And that can be really challenging on just on an emotional level, on a motivational level, to press through and continue to practice, continue to work, even if you have the strongest desire. Like I've certainly had those points where I'm just burnt out and I'm like, I'm working so hard and I'm not really noticing the improvement. Is that something that you've had to deal with in the past? Is that something that you have a remedy for, that you've used for yourself or suggested to your students?
Yeah, I do struggle with that stuff for sure. I feel like there's certain things in my playing that I've wanted to address for a long time, and it's hard to get to where I want to be with those things. I think for me, this is a personal thing. I tend to focus on the bad and not the good always. So I think it is important sometimes to like, sometimes we don't feel like we're progressing, but if you look back at what you've accomplished in a year or 5 years, I'm like, oh, I didn't have any of these skills 5 years ago. That's an important thing to remember. And it does come, it's, again, we're just not as used to the idea that we're not going to see overnight success with something. The idea that I'm not going to solve this overnight. This is going to take years of work to get to the point I want to be. That's something we kind of have to accept as well. But sometimes you need a break, and that's fine too. And sometimes you need a new source of inspiration. Sometimes I'll take a lesson with someone. I don't know what to practice, or I need some other tips. I'll reach out to friends of mine, colleagues, and I'll say, I'm struggling with this thing, and you're really good at that. How do you think about that thing? Yeah. So these are kind of some different ways, I think.
Seeing live music too. That's a big one for me.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, there's this, I don't know if I'd call it a cliche, but this common piece of advice that you hear in a lot of different creative fields, that it's real professionals don't rely on inspiration. They're building their craft, and like I can't remember exactly the most succinct way to put that, but something along the lines of don't wait for inspiration, don't rely on inspiration. Like, it's work. You show up every day and you be consistent. And I think that there's truth in there, but in reality, we do need a certain amount of inspiration to stay motivated. And it's finding that balance of being disciplined and pushing through, even when you don't want to do something, like whether it be practicing something that's, maybe not the most exciting exercise in the world, but, everybody tells you it's going to be good for you. But being able to still, in those moments, find some inspiration, whether it is to, like you were saying, talk to somebody who's done it a different way, or going to see live music, or just introducing some kind of novelty, can make those more challenging moments easier to push through.
Absolutely. And I think maybe you relate to this. I feel like I was raised in a particular era, and there was a lot of focus on like pushing yourself, always give 1,000%. And I think there's been a lot of burnout in our generation, just in general. And I think something I really do try to keep in mind with my students, I think you have to really listen to yourself too. If you need a break, take a break. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. I think about, hopefully this is a true story, but I think Rachmaninoff was so burnt out, he didn't like write any music for 2 years, and then he wrote his second piano concerto, which is like one of the most famous pieces of classical music ever written. So maybe I made that whole thing up, or it was a different piece or something, but I'm pretty sure, like, there's so many examples of stuff like that. People, sometimes you just need a break, and you can't push yourself so hard because you're not going to be creative. So it's about the balance, I think. If you're not working, you're not going to have any results. But if you're pushing yourself so hard that you're burning out, that's obviously not healthy either,
Yeah. And practicing smart is also a key component of this. Like we were just talking about breaking things down and just making it easier to practice it. You'll get better and be much less likely to burn out if you're practicing in a way that's not making you miserable. Again, going back to the gym analogy, you're not going to pick up those 50-pound weights if you're not able to pick up the 25-pound weights. So obviously you go to the lighter weight. But I think with music, it's just not as obvious. So sometimes we hit our heads against the walls, and it's unnecessary a lot of the time. We just have to calibrate and exercise to better fit where we're at.
That's right. And I think taking the pressure off is helpful too, because it's kind of like going to the gym. By the way, that takes me back to our time working out at the Y in Boston. Yeah. But and I was pounding.
Really showing on both of us.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't gain any muscle. But it's just some days you go to the gym and it's not going to feel like it was a good workout, but at least you went, and it's like practicing is like that too. Sometimes I feel like, oh, that was, if you say like, I didn't get anything done today, like that's not the right attitude to have. If you sit down at your instrument and play for 20 minutes, at least you're having that consistency. And that's something I have been trying to do more recently, is like just sit down every day, even if it's not a 3-hour practice session. But
oh yeah,
it's good to play. There's a big difference between when I haven't touched a piano for a few weeks versus if I just worked on a Chopin etude for 20 minutes a day. I feel like I could play the piano still,
Absolutely. And that's sort of a curse of a conservatory student, or somebody who takes it with that amount of who takes it that seriously. If you're so accustomed, this has happened to me so many times, at school, it seemed like the minimum amount of time I would practice during a practice session would be like 2 hours. And if I didn't have 2 hours, then, why bother? And back in those days, I had the time and the ability to spend, hours and hours and hours practicing. And then as, I got older and, life and work and family and all the rest, it's just harder to find those long stretches of time. But that feeling of, oh, if it's not, fit 5 hours, it's not worth it. That's a dangerous mindset, because then you're never going to go play. Like, much better to do, like you were saying, 20 minutes every day. I mean, this is something that is, again, it's just one of those obvious things that I've heard before, but I still manage to forget it. Like I'll be like, all right, should I practice now? Oh no, I only have 20 minutes. I'm not going to bother. Yeah, it's stupid. Be consistent, show up. And even if you're not noticing anything from coming from that particular session, doesn't mean it wasn't worthwhile. Let's start to wrap up here. I want to hit you with a couple of last questions. What would be your 1 or 2 desert island practice exercises or something along those lines?
I think if I lived in a desert island, I would just
come on. Let's do it for you and for a student. So for you now, what would be desert island, and then for like generic student?
If I want to keep my technique up, I would say something like the Chopin etudes. Just take a different etude every day or every couple weeks. Just practice it really slowly. That's what I go to if I have minimal practice time, or playing through Bach chorale, something like that, because it gets your fingers moving. It addresses a lot of different things. It's interesting harmonically, even though you're working on your technique. And then I would say, if I could only do 2 things, it would be something like that. That's technique oriented, but in a fun way, right? Because it's like interesting music, and it's not only helping your technique, it's helping many different aspects of your playing just by playing it. And then I would probably, you could call it transcribing, or just playing along with your favorite recordings, just because it has to be fun. So if, it's fun learning music that you like, and then you're able to play it on your instrument. I think that's pretty much, honestly, those 2 things pretty much cover every aspect of your playing. If you have some kind of foundational thing in terms of being good at your instrument, and then musically. Now, of course, if you want to talk about composing, but that's not really, I don't think, the question. But yeah. I think that's my favorite thing to do, is creating my own music, whatever that is. And that could include production stuff. That could be just writing a piece of music on manuscript paper. But
that's such a great way to wrap up, because I think something we've come back to again and again during this conversation is the idea of like the instrument specific challenges, but then also the more sort of fundamental music skills involved in playing any instrument. So, you talk about the Chopin etudes and playing Bach and how that addresses like the piano specific challenges. But then when you're transcribing and playing along with records and going deep, like we were talking about earlier, you're getting into all of those fundamentals, like ear training and rhythm and time and phrasing. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds with that kind of an approach. So I think that's a great way to end it. We went for quite a while here, a few false starts, but I'll have to decide whether or not to edit those out or not. Maybe in some outtakes.
Maybe we'll take the first one out, but then,
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. I hope we can do this again, maybe with some more, featuring some more of your music, and would love to hear you play more because, you teased us. But why don't you this is what they always say at the end of these things. Tell everybody where they can find out more about you and hear more of your music and all the rest.
Yeah, well, totally make sure you follow me on Instagram. I'm Alex Brown Music. Share my videos with your friends. Same thing on YouTube, Alex Brown Music. And you can find my music on all the streaming services. So it's just Alex Brown. As I mentioned, the latest album is Island to Island. That was a collaboration. And then the one before that was Dark Fire Sessions. And I'm working on a lot of really cool, fun stuff right now. So a lot of new things coming out soon.
Great.
Including an oboe sonata, actually, that I just wrote.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks, Alex. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jeff. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
There it is.